Welcome to the Argyle AI ML Technology Leadership Summit. My name is Eric Wallace with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. A couple of notes before we begin. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, and these include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. To ask questions during the session, simply type into the Q&A chat and we'll address your questions at the end of the session. Now let's begin with introductions. First, we'll just go around the virtual table and introduce ourselves for our panel discussion today. Norm, can you please start?
Yes, thanks, Eric. I'm a former vice president of data and analytics at NCR, a lifetime consultant specializing in retail, consumer products, and financial services.
Great, thank you. Deepti, can we continue introductions with you, please?
Yeah, my name is Deepti. I lead the AIML practice at MoneyGram International, and my primary role is around establishing the AIML governance standards and also leading initiatives which are primarily focused on optimizing the effectiveness and build efficiencies around it.
Greg, let's conclude introductions with you, please.
Sure. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Greg Thompson. I work for Eightfold AI. We are a talent intelligence platform. So basically a data platform on which we have built talent intelligence. Longtime practitioner and product manager in the talent space, having worked at Workday, SuccessFactors, and Oracle in the past. So very happy to be here today.
Great, thank you. Welcome, panelists. Let's begin with our first question, and that is, what do we mean when we talk about workforce optimization? Greg, can we start off with you, please?
Sure. So I think of workforce optimization as how do you effectively run your business better than you have in the past? I think the tools and techniques have obviously very quickly over the last 5 years. And so we're seeing, the focus on workforce optimization really starting with defining what do we have and what do we need. But that goes into all parts of the company, from what are the responsibilities of individuals to how are we going to pay for those individuals as well.
Norm, what do you think? What do we mean? What does workforce optimization mean in your context?
When I think of it from a data and analytics perspective, and working in the space for some long period of time, I think of it as productivity and proficiency of an employee. So if you put the CX view on it, it's the experience of the employee. I also think it has 4 elements that you need to examine through data, through analytics, and even AI now. You look at it from a workflow perspective, you look at it from a process perspective, you look at it from a decision support, and then also you look at it from a skills and knowledge perspective. All these 4 areas, in my opinion, helps you optimize your workforce. And we could give several examples through the course of this panel discussion.
Great, thank you. Deepti, what does workforce optimization mean when you talk about it?
So I see workforce optimization as a kind of a strategy for the organization to build the effectiveness and efficiencies around it. And I see that having the right skills and having the right talent and being at the right place is what we are trying to achieve with our workforce optimization. So they are I see that people see as employees as a cost, but actually employees or the resources are nothing but the drivers for the company's strength and revenue. So if I look into it like a kind of a high level overview, I see workforce optimization into the management of the talent, training and development of the resources, and at the same time, making sure that we look into the performance metrics around the resources and optimize them.
Great, thank you. As long as we're defining terms, let's continue. What do we mean when we talk about workforce intelligence? Norm, can you help us out with that to start, please?
Yes, simply put, it's the ability to collect information and analyze it around work patterns. So an example of that, you can look at how your employees are interacting with an application. There's tools out there like Hotjar, that not only is it used to look at the experience of a customer, you could actually look at it as using that tool to look at how your employees interact with applications and systems.
Deepti, what do you think?
So I see that workforce, like the previous question is like primarily around workforce management. I see that as a strategy, and workforce intelligence also I see as a strategy. So if you look into the difference between both of them, I see that for workforce intelligence, we use the data and analytics to drive insights and do a long-term planning in workforce intelligence. Whereas in workforce management, what we are doing is like we are planning it and executing it so that we have the right opportunities to build those efficiencies. So when it comes to workforce intelligence, we are using that data to optimize it for the longer term. So I see those two as a kind of like two pillars for the complete workforce optimization.
Great, thank you. And Greg, what do you offer us in conclusion on this question?
Yeah, I love what DP and Norm are saying. I would add that I think intelligence now means having data that not necessarily was generated by your own organization, right? So being able to compare yourself from a benchmark standpoint to other organizations and really get intelligence about what are the skills that are increasing in demand, what are those skills that are declining in command. Certainly, we can look at a lot of examples right now where machine learning is changing people's responsibilities. A resume 5 years ago, CV may include Microsoft Word for an executive assistant. Now I think you'll see a lot more ChatGPT type of skill sets. So workforce intelligence for me really means a constant review and adjustment of what you're doing within your workforce, with a keen eye on, are we engaging the people, retaining the people that we need? And if we don't, how are we going to get them from the market? Are they readily available or not as well? So the intelligence aspect really goes to strategy, operations, financial controls. But for me, the intelligence is being able to compare yourself to others.
So to follow up, how can artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies help with workforce intelligence? Deepti, can you take the lead on that one, please?
Yeah, sure. So like Greg mentioned that workforce intelligence is primarily like using the data and analytics and driving the initiatives around AI ML. So when we are using AI ML, the first thing we see is like the predictive capabilities of the machine learning. That means that we are mining the data, which is already we have saved for a long time, and then using that capabilities on top of it to build the AI ML engine. So in this case, like for workforce intelligence, using AI ML is like primarily to drive using NLP or like ChatGPT to optimize and make it more personalized when you are sending the emails around, like when you're hiring or something on those lines. And predictive capabilities is like to understand the employee engagement, how we can optimize the engagement, and making sure that we try to retain those employees within the organization. So there are multiple capabilities which we can enable it based on like what kind of use case you're working on from AI and ML standpoint. And to the Greg point, like previously 5 years back, it was Word, but now we need to be a little more creative using generative AI capabilities. And how do we optimize our complete process to make sure that we are building those efficiencies and effectiveness within that particular department.
Greg, what do you think?
I think what's key here is, the visibility and translatability of the machine learning. And what I mean by that is, do we see what it's doing? Do we know why these suggestions and recommendations are being presented to us? One thing I would caution against is the terminology of machine learning and AI is thrown around quite a bit. We see that nearly every industry has adopted machine learning to some degree. Over 50% of the organizations out there are already using machine learning. But the visibility, the insights that are being provided to you, are they being generated based on language, or are they being generated on other data, right? So I think Norm brought up a great point. You can be looking at data, for example, not just how many people have come to your site or your corporate site, but what were the outcomes? Did we actually schedule interviews with those people that came to our career site? Did we actually hire them? Those can be self-referential in that, you can literally start to target, should we get employees from our competitors? Yes or no? Maybe it's a different culture. They don't typically work out well if they're in the sales organization and join our company. Other types of insights like, data scientists are now embedded in every business, right? So it's not necessarily a technology company that you're competing against. Really, everybody's looking for learning and AI capabilities. And so the ability for you to target going after those specific skills, that's really where the intelligence needs to help you, not necessarily creating a better CV, but really saying, hey, to limit your efforts, here's where you should start, and here's the expected outcomes.
Thank you. Norm, what do you think? How can AI and ML help with the workforce intelligence in your experience?
Let me give 2 examples. Maybe I'll even give a third if I can go through it fast enough. So the first example is, and these are all examples I've personally been involved in, is pick your favorite grocery store. You go there in the evening and you're trying to go to the front of the store to check out at a grocery store, and there's not enough folks manning the lane, or the self-checkouts are only card only. So you can use the intelligence of the traffic in the store. You can use a computer vision to look at the queuing. You can use all these data points to basically optimize what your labor schedule should be during the morning shift, the afternoon shift, and the evening shift. And companies are doing this today. That's example number 1. Example number 2 with Gen AI, and again, this has been used, so it's folks that have done it will know what I'm talking about, is in a call center. There's 2 ways of thinking of it. A passive AI approach or a real-time AI approach. So the passive takes the call recordings and basically uses it to improve how the caller made its way into an agent to help them on whatever it may be, or direct them to a specialist that can really answer that question based on how they've been bouncing through the menu. That's more passive, and you can make changes by looking at the from a design and implementation, from how they navigated their way through the call center and finally got things resolved. But more where Gen AI is going is a real-time agent that's listening into the call and serving up content for you, searching for it, serving it up, and even whispering in your ear what to say or ask next. An example of that, Best Buy is trying to been using that for its Geek Squad troubleshooting and so on. So several examples around that. And then my last example, just quickly here, think of the carriers that pick up our package and deliver it to our household. When a sort facility goes down, or a truck is late into a sort facility, you have to redirect the packages on the next sort window, and that's all done behind the scenes without people getting involved. And again, it's optimizing your workflow, your process, and if you can do it with less labor, you do it, right? So these are 3 examples that I personally have been involved in.
Great, thank you. Let's continue with another definitional question. What do we mean when we talk about talent mapping? Greg, can you lead us off on that one, please?
Yeah, talent mapping goes back to what I said before, understanding what you have today and where you would like to go in the future. So talent mapping, for some industries really means, hey, we need to prepare for changes within our organization. Oil and gas, right? If you look at the type of data that they've hired people from the oil and gas industry, their job descriptions are all about oil and gas. Their outcomes of promotions are attributable to oil and gas, but yet they're being disrupted, and they really need now to have a brand new vocabulary around solar, renewable energy, right? So a lot of organizations are in this, point in time where they've dedicated a lot of humans to trying to describe jobs, and those descriptions are not very accurate or up to date, and so they become stale. I think where organizations are looking now is not only what do we have today, but what's the intention of this particular role in the future? And I think that's a good thing, because whether it's the organization looking down and saying, what is the career pathing that we will provide, and where do we put development resources, or the employee looking up saying, hey, is there an alternative path for me? I joined this organization, maybe I feel like it's a very short runway for my career, but I've got all these skills. How might I go and use those skills in a different manner? Personally, I've been a product manager in the HR software space for about 30 years. I joined this organization, and they have convinced me to be part of the services and the sales organization, things that I never expected that I could do. But because of my experience and my skills, customer satisfaction, technical acumen, a desire to self-educate, these are very popular in each of those organizations in our company. So it was a very easy transition for me personally, even though I didn't think that I had the vocabulary to be in the sales organization. I saw that I did have the skills that contribute to a positive outcome. So I've made a midlife, career change simply because I was excited about a new role, not stuck with an old job title.
Thank you. Norm, what do you think? What do you mean when we talk about talent mapping?
Well, obviously, it's anticipating the future needs of the business. And the two examples I would give is, again, in retail, it's arming your workforce with the product knowledge in the department or all departments that they're in. So if you go into a grocery store and you're asking about produce, they help you. If you ask about another product in a grocery store, they also help you. So product knowledge, arming them with that knowledge to help a customer is pretty important. But as of probably recently, think of the knowledge and skill set needed for people in the data field or the data science field or the analytics or AI field. So there's efforts going on today to educate, train, create courses for corporations to drive more knowledge, more skill set to take advantage of data, AI, analytics, and so on. So I'm seeing these two things really take off in the last 10 years.
Great, thank you. Deepti, what does talent mapping mean in your place of work?
So when you say talent mapping, just by the two words, it's like mapping the talent to the right skill set. So I see that in talent mapping, what we try to do is like identify what your current skill set is of a particular employee or resource, and what are the future needs for a particular department. Each department works differently. HR has a different needs, finance has a different needs, and like data and analytics has a different needs. Like you have data, business intelligence reporting, and then we have data science. So it's like understanding the requirement and mapping it to the future. Like you need to also make sure that what are the current trends which are going on in the industry, and map it so that the employees would be more resourceful. And I see that AI ML in this space is like primarily is like kind of optimizing the efficiencies around it, than like cutting on the job side or something on those lines. So I see that it's like just a mapping so that the resources are well prepared for the future, and also like making sure that they are well integrated within the organization. So talent mapping is like primarily around those four pillars, which I mentioned.
And Deepti, let's have you take the lead on this next question. And that is, how can artificial intelligence and machine learning make talent mapping easier and more effective?
So talent mapping is like, I put it into two categories. One is internal resources, another is in getting the external resources. So when you say within the internal resources, with the rapid space in the AI ML space and how quickly the Gen AI has took over in last couple of months, you can see the space, pace in which it is going. So in talent mapping, we can use AI ML, especially in the sourcing side of it, if you wanted to bring in new resources, and we can use it in the sourcing, then we can use it into in automating those messages, which we send it to the personally send it to the resources who are applying for a particular job, or maybe we can use them in the onboarding side of it. So the talent AI ML can be used in multiple different scenarios within the HR department, and also we can use it within each department of like individual department, whether it is finance or data and analytics space.
Greg and then Norm, can you please respond to this one?
Yeah, I would say that there's a couple of things to keep in mind. Explainability is going to be much more important going forward, right? I don't think that machine learning is always going to be a black box. I think there is compliance and regulatory aspects that are coming into this space. So being able to retrace, why is this suggestion? Why is this recommendation being given to me? And with that transparency, I think is explainability. And it should be explainable both to the C-suite all the way to the individual, full-time employee. Why do we think that you're this job, or what are those deficiencies that you need to work on so that you can progress into this particular position? That transparency is really going to revolutionize, if you will, the whole organization going forward. It's no longer a back office, hey, I wrote down what your job is, and once a year we're going to have a performance review where we look at those bullet points and I grade you. Jobs are much more dynamic. Jobs are much more project-based today. And so how do you assemble a team of people together to accomplish something, as opposed to, we hired you for this job and for the next 10 years, you're going to do exactly the same thing. So I do think that explainability meets compliance is really where machine learning has to go.
Great, thank you. Norm?
Yes, I'm aware of some key initiatives in the marketplace around creating bots to evaluate the knowledge of an employee. And these efforts are tied to universities with some of the top professors like Stanford, Harvard, MIT, and so on. It's focused on an interactive dialogue between the bot and the individual, and based on those set of questions that the bot comes up with and how the employee or person responds to it will gauge their level of proficiency in that area. And why this is so important is you got to make decisions whether an employee is ready for the front line and critical jobs, and you want to be able to go through something other than a pass-fail type of testing or certification to gauge whether they're really equipped to do with the various exceptions that surface out in the field. So that's my short answer on what I believe is happening in this space.
Thank you. Let's go into a little more detail on the specific stages of the employee lifecycle. The next question is, what are some examples of how AI and ML can help with talent sourcing and recruitment? Greg, can we start with you and then we'll continue with Norm?
Yeah, happy to. That's really the essence of the organization that I work for. So we start with a global data set that includes publicly available information from around the world. So think of it as mapping about half of the career directories of everybody on the planet. So 1.5 billion career trajectories is the data that we start with. The question of how can it help? Many different ways, but in machine learning and AI, one thing that we talk about is a feature. And a feature is a very specific answer to a question of the data. right? So the data itself can answer many, many different questions, but you do have to focus the model on specific data that is important or should be excluded. And let me give you an example of that. When trying to match people to jobs, one thing that you must consider is bias, and you must remove that bias, right? So in our models, one of the things that we do is we use a golden data set that does not include any personally identifiable information. So we extract out people's names, university names, the year that you graduated, right? And we train our model. After we train the model, we go through a QA process to say, okay, let's see if bias came into the model. And so we use the golden data does not have bias information against a very biased data set. So think of 10,000 clean CVs and 10,000 CVs that have lots of dates and pronouns. In this way, we're able to statistically prove that the model is not suggesting based on gender, not suggesting based on age or these other PII factors. And so we do have the ability to have a feature that is purpose-built. The result of that is we see in our customer base a 60% increase in application completions because the bot, the AI is not biased, and it's saying, here are some jobs that you're a strong match and a good match for. We also see about 40% increase in female applicants. In studies that men tend to apply to any job be considered for, where women tend to really look at the responsibilities and judge themselves a little harder than men. So with the bot making the recommendation to a person, hey, these are the jobs that you should apply for based on your CV, it overcomes that bias. It overcomes the candidate maybe not knowing what terminology you use within your organization, right? So these features are really important because they are based on data, they are statistically valid, and you can also, as Norm is saying, look at the outcomes. Who made it to the interview? Who got an offer? Who was actually hired? Well, hiring's a great signal, but so is silver medalist, those people that made it multiple steps through the process, right? So if we want to go back and look at somebody we want to hire, why not look at the silver medalist to begin with? AI can do that out of the box. It can make the recommendations of this versus that in a very transparent sort of manner.
Great, thank you. Deepti, can we continue with you, please?
Yeah, so on the complete life cycle, you see that we have sourcing is one part of it. The pre-employee engagement is also one part of it, where we can leverage AI ML. I see that we get pools of resumes which are stuck. We apply and you don't get any response from it. But when you are sourcing it and identifying what the job, what we are looking for, and mapping the resources and the pre-employee to the mapping, I think it is very critical. And AI ML is using the NLP technologies. We can map those the unstructured data to a structured format and map it for with the job what you're looking for. That is one particular use case where we can optimize using AI ML. And the second thing is having the kind of the resource chatbot, which Greg mentioned about, having those engagement early on to understand a little bit more about the talent and removing the bias in the data and then mapping back to the job description what we are looking for. I think it is very critical because bias is there, and it is a thing which we have to address right now. And also making sure that we are in compliance with all the other norms within that AI ML space. I think that is critical for the end-to-end implementation of AI ML solution.
Thank you. And Norm, can we conclude with you, please?
I don't have any more to add. These guys did a great job.
Well, let's have you lead off on the next question, which is, what are some examples of how AI and ML can help with employee onboarding?
I think first of all, knowledge acquisition is the most important part of it. So as part of onboarding, you could have ways of accelerating not only the knowledge acquisition of an employee, but also any formal training that they need to get certified on. It's in line with what I said earlier about interacting with a bot and it evaluating your knowledge and your proficiency in a given area.
Okay, thank you. Deepti, what do you think?
So on the onboarding experience, I think we need to have like the trainings which are currently being manual that can be automated using AI, and having a chatbot with preloaded information around like what to look for, where the access is, where the folders are, where the knowledge repository. Those things are currently manual and it takes like long time to onboard a resource. I think those stuff can be automated. Along with that, we can automate few of the pre-administrative stuff, which will help the employee to be engaged with personal messages, and using Gen AI, we can have those personalized content created for the onboarding process. That would help and reduce a lot of manual effort and increase the efficiencies around that process.
Great, thank you. Greg, what do you make of this?
So for onboarding, I think a couple of things. Number one, does the organization understand me? Right? I think a huge failure in the past has been we've focused on, compliance forms like an I-9, fill that out, and we've called that onboarding. I think the new method is, does the organization understand me and my particularities, right? My strengths, my weaknesses, where I want to focus. So onboarding, I think, the traditional HR data systems don't really let you describe yourself in multidimensional ways. We are seeing much more comprehensive CVs. Here is my work, my portfolio of things that I've worked on in the past. So I'm bringing my whole self to this organization. That's one. The second part is, what happens after I provide this information? And again, things like I-9 forms just go off into the ether, and we really don't feel the impact of filling out that form and what it does for me. So I think onboarding, in addition to describe yourself, the organization needs to tell you, okay, did you know here are immediate learning opportunities for you, right? The bot has been able to identify that there may be a skill gap. Maybe you're 99% perfect for this job, but there's just one area you don't have experience, and the bot can close that gap by recommending the class. That class doesn't necessarily have to be tagged by the learning department to say that it's a relevant class. The bot may be looking at the content, may also be looking at people in your organization and saying, I don't know what reason, but it seems like everybody on your team has taken this agile methodology, and I don't see agile methodology on your CV or your profile. Maybe this is something that you need to take. So I think those two things of bring yourself and let the organization and the system reflect back to you what your opportunities are, I think that's tremendously transformational. We've talked about it in the HR industry for a long time, but now we actually have that engagement, that experience outcome immediately for the employees. And again, it shows up in a variety of ways, such as enrolling into a learning class increases by 65% if you have a profile that has been completed, right? So these things are connected to each other, and it really comes down to, does the employee feel engaged? Do they feel like they're part of the culture in the tribe? And Deepti, I think you're spot on. Folks like ServiceNow are investing a lot into AI to predict what are those business processes or workflows that you need to complete in week 1, week 3, all the way down to, at your job title, not just your business unit. So lots of recommendations, immediate outcome and engagement, I think, are important.
Thank you. Let's change the channel a little bit and take some questions that are coming in from the audience. The first of which is an interesting one, and it's, hello, I'm curious to know how you see AI and ML technologies impacting space travel. In what ways do you believe these technologies can improve predictions and strengthen decision-making in this field of space exploration? Anybody want to take the first swing at that?
Just quickly, I think, again, there are lots and lots of tests that are run on astronauts today because there are so few astronauts. But as we see with recreational space travel now, you don't have to necessarily go through a 5-year program. So space travel is going to benefit by, again, artificial intelligence knowing me very personally, and how I am different from the astronaut next to me, right? So my sleep patterns, my my mood swings. Am I a morning person, afternoon person? In space, maybe that gets very confusing. But I do think that artificial intelligence is going to now include not just the technical aspects of the rocket, but the soft aspects of the human as well.
Deep-tier Norm, any thoughts on the impact of AI and ML on space travel?
That's way beyond me. I'm focused on the ground. Sorry.
Sure. Let's move on to the next question. That's, have you noticed any false positives in your results?
So I can take that question. So when you're building a model, and especially you have like data which is like so wide variety that you end up with the false positives. But the idea is like when you're building a model and you see a false positive, you need to fine tune your model and understand like what those false positives are and whether we are using the right metrics around like to evaluating that particular model. And also making sure that we are not introducing bias into the model so that it is like only biased towards certain aspect of it. So you need to completely evaluate the model from all the perspective and then say that, okay, everything is evaluated, and having that AI ML governance around it would help you to streamline it and standardize the ML model. So yeah, these are some of the caveats which we have to look into it and make sure that the results are aligned with what your business goal is. And for fraud detection, you need to look into it from certain aspect of it, whether it is a true positive or a false positive. So similarly, based on the business use case, you can evaluate which metric is completely aligned to your model behavior.
Thank you. Norm and Greg, do you have any thoughts on when have you noticed false positives in your results?
Well, let me just go quickly. I run into false positive throughout my entire career. And normally when I run into it, works well in one country. When I go into another country, it's flipped upside down. So you just got to know about, how are you using, your models as you go from country to country, and just realize there's going to be differences. Flip the differences and you'll have false positives.
I would add that, what Deepti is saying is the features need to understand what their answers are, right? And so if you're consistently getting false positives, then you got to go back to your model and reassess how you're looking at that data. But there's also the case where you might think there is a false positive and you need to investigate. And I think the important point here is be involved, right? Test that theory, find out the underlying reasons. And I'll give you an example. We use artificial intelligence to infer genders of individuals. Very famously, only about 10% of the people filling out an application will ethnicity and their gender. So a lot of organizations struggle because they don't have enough data. We are using AI in two different ways. One of those is to identify, based on large data set, the US Census. Look at somebody's first name. And does the US Census say that over 95% of the people are versus another? So Susan, yes, one gender. Chris, not so much. We can't really discern which gender somebody is, right? But the inference is there to help us when we don't have data. And the false positive aspect is this: we could be hiring the best people possible, all 5 stars, and then discover that we have a hiring manager that has hired 3 people in a row that only have 2 stars. Okay, well, there's a false positive, right? It's something's going on. Maybe it's a brand new job title the company's never had before, and our job description is not very good for that particular manager. But we have to ask ourselves, why did that manager overlook maybe 1,000 other candidates that were 5 and 4 and 3 stars to always pick 2 stars, right? So the false positive can also be an indicator, right? When a human looks at it, to say, let me find out why this is so radically different. And again, if the model is doing the right thing, you're going to find out that it's human behavior that has influenced those anomalies.
Question is, do you have ethical concerns at this stage?
Sure.
And if so, what are they?
Just like any tool, I think that bias and compliance are super, super important. I don't think that we've caught up to the reality yet. I do think there are some good starts. So New York City now has their bias audit requirements. So if you are collecting information from public people in New York City for marketing or for job matching, you need to go to a third party and be audited to ensure that you do not have bias in your recommendations. I think we're going to see a lot more of those types of compliance. Certainly our German customers are very much involved in wanting to understand what is it doing and how is it doing. So the automated aspect of self-driving cars may be a little farther out for the organization, but if we start focusing on bias right now and outcomes, I do think that we can mitigate that risk, because we are acknowledging that it may be there and taking proactive steps to ensure that it doesn't influence.
You have ethical concerns, and what are they?
So I see that there are few things, like at least the 3 things which I normally consider when I'm when the organization is building a model, is like the data and privacy concerns around what data are we using to build the model. And the second thing is the bias in AI, are we introducing any bias in the data? And the third one is the black box problem, because ML generates some result. You give a data and it will provide you a result, but is the result valid? And is it aligned with your business use case? And can you do some explainability around it? I think few years back, it was not the case, where you're using it and you can use some of the models where it gives you a little predictability. But I see that the future of AI is around these 3 concerns, like the AI and bias, the data and privacy concern, and the black box. And I think as per the regulatory and the compliance side, we need to have some explainability integrated within the model so that we can address the ethical concerns at each stage and make sure that whatever the result it is throwing, we have an explanation to it. I feel like there are more regulations coming towards the black box problem going forward.
Great, thank you. Norm, can you wrap us up? What do you have ethical concerns in your AI and ML practice?
No, not from an employee perspective. If you look at the big 4 accounting firms, if you're an employee of those type of companies, you have to disclose everything, and they track everything about you. So if I was a customer, yes. If I'm an employee, I would say no.
Thank you. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions today. Thank you, panelists, for this insightful discussion. And I want to thank everyone in the audience for joining us today. Thanks very much.